I'm sure you've all watched lots of videos about at-home photo projects lately. Me too. But today, I thought I would do my own version. So we're going to take some macro-style photos with budget gear. Larry here with Southern Exposure, information and inspiration for the amateur photographer. Just like you, we've been stuck here at home, which limits our photographic opportunities. But I recently posted some photos to my Instagram that I thought would make a good video. Let me start off by saying macro is a very specialized genre with its own equipment and techniques, and I don't want to minimize the importance of that. For that reason, I'm referring to these as macro style photos, and my focus is going to be on taking these types of images at home with minimal gear. So let's get started. Let's look at gear first. True macro photography uses specialized lenses, tripod mounts, ring lights, and techniques like focus stacking. For our exercise, we're trying to use things you may already have or could get easily and cheaply. I'm using a Nikon D3400, a 35mm f1.8, and a cheap set of extension tubes from Amazon. There's links in the description for everything you'll need. I chose a prime lens because it has a couple of advantages over a zoom in this situation. First, it simplifies things by eliminating the variable of zooming in and out, which can affect the minimum focusing distance. Second, I'll be focusing manually, and I find it much easier to set the focus at minimum distance on a prime lens. That being said, you definitely can do this with the kit lens that came with your camera, so if that's all you have, don't let that stop you. The only special gear we need is a set of extension tubes. These are really simple devices that move your lens a little further away from the sensor, which decreases the minimum focusing distance of your lens. They're just hollow tubes. There's no glass elements, so they won't affect image quality at all, and you can get a decent set for around $30 to $40. Choose the ring you want. I usually start with the thinner ones first. Attach it to your camera, then attach the lens to the extension ring. Next, let's take a look at our setup. You see a lot of macro photos taken outdoors of flowers or insects, but I wanted to do something a little different, so we're staying inside. To do this, you need a plain surface or background, but it doesn't need to be very big. I'm using this coffee table, but it could be just about anything you want. Finally, you need a subject. When I first started doing this, I was tempted to just grab anything close by that was relatively small, but I found that doing this is much more enjoyable if you pick a subject that actually interests you. For instance, one of my other hobbies is fly fishing, so I chose fishing reels as my subject. If you're into cooking, it could be your favorite wooden spoon. Like sports, grab your baseball mitt. All it really matters is that it's something that speaks to you and has some level of interesting detail to it. So here's my setup, and I'm ready to take some shots. You may have noticed that when I went over gear, I didn't mention a tripod. That's because I'm not using one. You'll see why in a minute. Another thing missing is any sort of additional light. We'll add that a little later, but first, let's see what we can accomplish going super basic and just using the available light in the room. I highly recommend shooting in manual mode for this, but you don't have to. The most important setting here is your aperture. You don't want to shoot wide open because remember, for any given aperture setting, the closer you are to your subject, the narrower your depth of field is going to be. So you want to close that aperture down to around f8, maybe even f11. You'll still have some out of focus areas, but it will be manageable. The technique I like to use is I set my focus to minimum, get close to my subject, then simply move slightly forward and backward until the focus is where I want it, and pull the trigger. Okay, so we got our first shots, but they're very noisy. I had to really crank the ISO because of the light levels and the aperture setting. These shots are at ISO 25,600, and that's really pretty awful. So let's introduce a little more light to the scene. I'm using this basic clamp light from the hardware store, but you could just as easily use a lamp. Now we're getting somewhere. With the additional light, I was able to drop my ISO down to 200, eliminating the noise problem. You can certainly spend an entire afternoon shooting just like this, with this very basic setup. But I'm going to go one step farther and replace the clamp light with a flash. I've added a speed light and a remote trigger. My speed light's on a stand with a shoot-through umbrella, and I've set my white balance to flash. Let's see what kind of a difference this makes. An entry-level DSLR, a light, and some extension tubes, and boom, you're a macro photographer. Well, you're ready to start practicing anyway. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this process. I'm also thinking about doing a video specifically on using off-camera flash, so if that's something you're interested in, let me know as well. If you're just tired of doing indoor photo challenges, watch this video next, where my daughter and I try to get some wildlife shots right at the end of our street. Talk about a challenge. Thanks for watching. Now go take pictures and have fun doing it.